Yes, and welcome to City Views, City News, City Biz right here on KRUU-FM 100.1 in your local FM dial. And that's KRUU-FM.com and the World Wide Web machine. We're welcoming Michael Halley into the studio here. Also, Jason Strong for FMC. Always good to see you. And what do we got on the docket today, Michael?
All right. So this is the one meeting we have in December. Instead of doing two, we just do one. So got a lot on there. It's our regular city council meeting from December 18th. Here is my as close to impartial review of it as possible. All right. So we had two public forums appearances. First was our friend Dan Miller from the Jefferson County Environmental Health Department.
Radon.
Yes. January is Radon Awareness Month. Apparently about half the properties tested have radon levels that are higher than considered safe. So radon is just a radioactive gas that's very, very common here in Iowa. It just goes with the territory. Can cause lung cancer ultimately if not abated. So, but apparently it's not extremely expensive to abate it. Maybe between, he said, $500 and $1,500. It's essentially just allowing the air under your home to go somewhere else rather than in your home. So every January, the Jefferson County Environmental Health Department provides free radon testing kits to the public. So keep your eyes open for when and where those are available. You can also buy them. They're relatively inexpensive at most hardware stores. We also heard from Maxine, no last name, who is requesting that the city add to our nuisance ordinance light nuisance, similar to noise nuisance, where if a neighbor were projecting too much light from their property into the neighbor's property, that there would be repercussions. The city did not take any action, but instead deferred it to Public Safety Committee. It'll be interesting just to even find out if other cities have such a thing. I suppose that a noise ordinance, I don't know if there are decibel level measurements that say, okay, you've gone past what's allowed.
There at least could be, yeah.
Could be. And so what do you do for light? Lumens? You know, like how do you say that's too much light from your neighbor? But the concern was specifically this time of year, people leaving Christmas lights on all night. And
keeping neighbors up?
I suppose. I mean, we thought perhaps.
I mean, maybe if they were blinking or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, sure. I don't mean to have not a straight face on that.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept. But I liked what Mayor Malloy said, is that typically we prefer if people can work these things out in a neighborly fashion rather than adding another law to the books. So hopefully that can be resolved by curtains and or talking to neighbors and whatnot. All right, we had a long list of resolution action items and ordinances. We heard from a gentleman who wants to keep a beehive on West Fillmore. Now, his backyard is adjacent to the parking lot of O.B. Nelson Park. So some council members had a concern that may not be the best place to put a beehive of 40,000 bees, just because there's so many children in the vicinity. We didn't say no. We said, first talk to your neighbors. And we used the 200-foot radius rule that is used for any sort of rezoning and whatnot in a city, that any property within 200 feet is notified. And we said, go out and talk to your neighbors and get some feedback and then come back and we'll discuss it. But the law is that they are allowed only by special permission from the council. And the last beehive that I believe the council allowed was on MUM campus in a remote area away from dwellings.
Okay.
So this may be a tough sell, asking to put a beehive so close to a city park, especially one with a child's playground nearby. The airport brought their 5-year capital improvement plan to us, and I could say they're not going to expand any runways or build any new buildings. They're just looking at repairing some of the approaches, the cement approaches to certain hangars over the course of these 5 years. The airport gets a lot of funding from the federal government, so a lot of their projects are 90% federal government, 10% local match, and they've been very good about budgeting for these things. So that plan will likely unfold as as they had it stated. So we approved that. Some sewer work on Little Fawn and Taylor is approved. A local bidder got that. Drish Construction, small project, but a little bit outside the scope of what city crews can do. So I think it was a $17,000 project. We talked about, had another public forum for resolution authorizing public improvement, which may require acquisition of agricultural land. That has to do with step 2 sewer easements. And there were 3, I think, or 4 property owners who were not invited to their initial public hearing. And so we held another public hearing to allow them to ask any questions. They didn't come. I think they already spoke with our city engineer, Melanie Carlson, and got their questions answered. But we moved forward on that resolution just so that, and it's interesting, if you're interested, if you want to go on the city's Facebook page or the city's website, find the agenda and click the link. But there's a list of rights that the property owner has, and they must be paid for any land that's either taken as a permanent or temporary easement, and it's got to be fair market value, and there's all these protection so that the city can't just come in and take what it wants. This is a side story, but I was talking to a gentleman from China and working on getting the easement for the new North Entryway sign, and he said, this isn't how it is or was when I was in China. They would just take private land if they wanted. So we're ahead of the curve in terms of protecting civil liberties here in the United States. Even if people don't want disruption, that's the problem. There may be some disruption when the new line goes in terms of old trees coming down. And as we know, you can't replace an old tree. You replace it with a little tree and wait 30 years, maybe you might get the size of the old tree back. But the city will do its best to compensate people fairly for those easements. And there are going to be a lot of them for step 2. Step 2 runs from Lamson Woods, more or less along Crow Creek, all the way up to the university. So it's a pretty good stretch of sewer line. All right, the next several matters have to do with accelerated learning. It's a nonprofit, sells, I think it's math kits to kids to help them learn math. Purchased the old St. Mary's property on 3rd Street.
And what group was that?
Accelerated Learning. That's the name of their nonprofit. So they purchased those old buildings and have been using them, I think, for some housing. And then the old parsonage or whatever you call it is used for their office. And there's a field in the back. And they have a proposal to put in 3 triplexes and 2 single unit, all rental property.
Wow.
1 story. They're saying they're marketing it towards, or from Jeffrey Hedquist, marketing it towards both retired people and millennials who are interested in rentals rather than purchase. They think it's a good location, close to downtown, close to various amenities. So one thing we did was vacate a portion of the alley. We had already vacated almost the entire alley along that property, but there was this one little piece that wasn't. So we vacated that, which means they'll purchase that from the city and make it part of their private property. The parking would be north of the field, and we also approved what's called a planned unit development, and that involves both residential and commercial. And since they have that office and commercial space on the property, they have to call the whole thing a planned unit development. So we're trying to help move this along. We're also rezoning some of it from business to PUD, planned unit development. So they said that if everything lines up, they'll be looking to construct spring or summer of next year. So this kind of infill development it's really good because you're not expanding the city on the outskirts. It's also good for the developers because one challenge for developers, especially here in Fairfield, is when you build where there's not current infrastructure, streets, water, wastewater, it's not there. Someone has to pay for it to put it in. And if the developer takes that financial cost, then they can't make a profit when they sell their properties. So they try and enter into agreement with the city where the city can create a tax increment finance situation, a TIF district, and take their property tax generated to pay for those things. And so that's a way it keeps it off the rest of us. So we're not paying for it. It's, it's their development. They pay for the infrastructure, but over time, still, it's a tricky formula to take all those expenses and still be able to price new real estate at a price that will sell. So infill, they've got the roads, they've got the water. There's very little infrastructure that needs to be done. And there are multiple opportunities here in the city for either single family units where there was a house that maybe burned down or was torn down, or in this case, three triplexes and 2. That's a good number of units to add, 8 units. So it's 2 triplexes, I believe. I can't remember. I'll have to look. Let's see if we can find the rendering. 2 triplexes, thank you. Because I remember 8 was the number. So it's a total of 8 just separate
additional units.
Yep.
Well, I see the place right across the street from the radio station's also now for sale.
Oh, that's right.
Which is right across from the place that you're talking about, Harper Brush, it used to be.
Yep. Yeah, it's you're right. It's a little across the street, across 3rd Street. So maybe we'll see some interesting things happening. But I know that the Depot brewery was a great revitalization in the whole New Chicago area. We'd love to see more of that. So,
well, the brewery too, going up eventually by spring. Mm-hmm.
Yep. So if we get this planned unit development in these units, and then maybe see some more revitalization of that area.
Yeah,
it's an interesting area. It's got history.
By the way, you are listening, to City Business. This is James Moore with KRUU-FM. Michael Halley giving us the latest haps of what's going down at City Hall. We do appreciate him stopping by, and you can catch that after City Hall sessions the following Tuesday lunchtime, or Thursday dinner time, 6:30 p.m. the following Monday breakfast time, 6:30 a.m. We also have Fairfield Media Center in the house. If you want to see this for whatever reason, you might want to do that in 3D. Do so at your own risk. But thank you, Jason, for being in the house. Jason Strong, and back to what's left. Looks like, I guess, with the one meeting, a lot going on.
These are wordy, but they're basically a public hearing preceding an ordinance, and the ordinances were 2 ordinances, one for Urban Renewal District at we call it the West Industrial Park Urban Renewal District. That's to extend Tyler, one of those 2, out by Traffics. And again, that'll be funded by the property tax created by their expansion. So I won't pay for it. You won't pay for it. That development will pay for it. Same thing down at Lincoln Avenue, where Neighborhood Builders is putting in. They're working on another building out there. And so that's the one I was talking about, especially where just finding that right balance between the cost of infrastructure and the cost of the buildings. We still haven't entered into a development agreement with them, which will be required before any of that tax increment is collected and any work is done. And that just says the city will do XYZ and the developer will build and bring X amount of new property tax to the city. They have to have a certain assessed value that they reach, because that's what funds the work that the city would do. And we can't do the work without knowing those funds are coming. It's part of our city policy. We do not spend any revenue. We don't take on an expenditure unless we have a revenue stream. Not revenue. We don't take on an expense unless there's a revenue stream to match. And that's how you balance your budget. And that is how you stay out of debt. So we're moving on those 2, but the Lincoln Avenue will not move forward with any work until that development agreement is reached. All right. So I talked about this last time. The state has changed the law. So if an individual is charged with a general misdemeanor, they can request legal representation if there's potential jail time. So the simplest way to do this is to just remove jail time as a punishment for these simple misdemeanors. And that's what we just did. We had to pass it to its final reading because this will take effect in 2018. The city has no budget to pay for legal representation for these, what you may call petty crimes. And so at this point, they will not have jail time as a potential outcome. Instead, it'll just be fines. So if the city just choose to then add those back at some point, we would have to then come up with a funding source to pay for if somebody were asking for legal counsel. The city would have to fund that. The state used to. They're getting out of the business, and now they're putting that financial burden on the cities. And also, we this is kind of boring. Rezoned 413 North 3rd Street. The reason I suppose I heard is that it was under manufacturing. It's where Boom Fitness is and some other storage. But if it changes from M2 to B1, which it just did as of last night, that allows second floor apartments. So perhaps there's somebody interested, or the landlord of the business, the property owner is interested in some second floor apartments. So there's always a reason behind these things. It's not just that somebody wanted to rezone for the fun of it. The mayor's report included a conversation that the mayor and Public Works Director Daryl Bisgard had with David Vollmer from Alliant about replacing some lights downtown. So the city's old, we call them the Brontosaurus, the dinosaur neck green lights are getting old, and some of them are dangerous. So the city would like to purchase or lease from Alliant some nicer lights that match the newer ones that are on certain streets downtown, but not all. So there's some newer ones that are black, that were part of the streetscape, but only along Main and part of Broadway, but not the rest of the square. So it would be nice to do that for public safety, but also to add better lighting. We're also going to look at changing out the bulbs in the existing lights, the newer ones, to give a better quality of light. And then also just to kind of create a more cohesive downtown. So it's not part new, part old, but everything looks nice and fits. Let's see. He also talked about, got to remember what he talked about. Oh, the work session for the council. So we always meet at the beginning of the year after an election to go over things. We'll meet on January 6th from 9 a.m. till noon and talk about various things, including we heard from Terry Baker from the Convention Visitors Bureau from Wayfinding about converting downtown back to two-way streets from the one-way that was put in place in the 60s. So this came as a recommendation from multiple sources, but most recently from the architectural group that came to town and gave assistance and input for wayfinding. So it's not just being able to know where you're going, but being able to get where you need to go. And so Terry Baker and Darian Sloat, who's the CEO of the chamber, both went door to door and talked to retail owners downtown. And they had 100% support. They got people actually signing a form saying we support this, especially those on Court Street, because they have trouble trying to give people directions to their place, because you can't simply turn off Burlington on the Court. You have to cut down Main, and you can only go one direction on Broadway. So telling somebody who's not familiar with that one way how to get there can be difficult. The city had a walking audit just this last Friday. It was Healthy Hometown, which is Wellmark's new health and wellness initiative, sponsored it. And we focused on downtown, looking at, is there room to do two-way conversion? Absolutely. There is. It was that way before. It was changed in the 60s, and it appears that it was changed to accommodate the heavy traffic from Parsons College had expanded in the 60s. And somewhere I read or heard that Parsons had the largest Corvette club in the country. So it was car culture back then. And so they actually, to get those 3 lanes around Central Park, they shrunk Central Park. So perhaps we can expand Central Park, take one of those lanes out, and convert back to two-way. It'll be quite different for a time, but it'll be much more visitor-friendly and easier for people to navigate.
Life has changed, folks.
Yep. Change and change back. And if you think about like renovated spaces, when the thing to do is to put drop ceilings in, and then now everyone wants to uncover these beautiful tin ceilings. And
it's like skinny pants, fat pants,
exactly.
Skinny pants, fat pants.
That's right. It's the ebb and flow of pants.
If you just don't move, you'll come around. That's what I say.
Yeah, save all your old out-of-style stuff. It'll come back in style at some point.
Also, a clock that is not working is still right twice a day.
Oh, that's profound.
Anyway, sorry, back to...
That's right. So Ways and Means had 4 things. One was funding FEDA, Fairfield Economic Development Association. The fund the city had that we used to give to them every year is gone. And so we found funds in our general fund for that. And then the second item was a more donor wall on the at the Cambridge Sportsplex. The city got $1 million grant from Community Attraction and Tourism, CAT, and they require that we have a donor wall. And the CAT people had called the mayor and said, we want to close out this grant. And they went through a checklist, and the one unchecked box was the donor wall. So we have got to get that one up. And then the other 2 projects had to do with solar, expanding the solar array on the library, and a proposal for solar at 7 other city sites. And both of those will go to RFP, request for proposal. And the city will take the bids, sealed bids, and then decide if any of them are worth pursuing. We also heard from Scott Vaughn, Fire Chief, about Shop with a Hero. And this is a program that the Elks Club helped fund. And they treated 20 families to a lunch, pizza lunch, and took them shopping at Walmart, $50 gift cards, and then gave them, I think, $150 gift cards to Hy-Vee, all as part of this charitable holiday giving. And they matched them up with local law enforcement and fire department personnel to kind of give it a little extra something.
40-some vehicles.
Oh yeah, 40-some vehicles were parked downtown by the Elks that day. A lot of fire trucks and first responder, ambulance, and sheriff and police were all there. So that's a real treat for the kids and a nice way to give back. Almost there. Had the north entryway sign. We came in under budget for the installation. So if you're driving out Highway 1 coming into town, you'll see a beautiful limestone sign that's very similar in look to the south sign. And we'll find a new home for the one that was there that David Fulcher worked on as an Eagle Scout. And we'll landscape this one in spring and do a ribbon cutting at that time. Finally, but definitely not lastly, last night was the final meeting for our dear friend, Councilman John Revelinsky, who'd served on the city council here in Fairfield for 20 years. And he decided not to run for re-election this year, so Paul Gandy will be taking the second ward seat, be sworn in on January 2nd. But we had some kind words for John and some thanks for all his hard work. And John has been known not only to say no to beer gardens on Central Park, which is kind of one of his things, and not only working on tobacco cessation, I know he's a strong advocate, but also for looking out for the little guy and really encouraging the city to be as fiscally responsible as possible and to keep water rates low and sewer rates low and taxes low. And that's one of his passions. And so I told him we would continue that good work, trying to keep anything related to the city, keep those expenses as low as possible, try to maintain a very livable and affordable community for everyone. But thank you, John Revelinsky, for 20 years of service to the city.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you, John.
Yep.
And your son, who's an amazing DJ and has been a show host here, but seriously, all the great work. Michael, thank you for taking the time to come in and catch us up on what's happening at City Hall. Also, Jason Strong, always good to see you. And
we'll see you next year.
Yeah, next year. Yeah. Wow. It doesn't feel like Christmas somehow with this spring weather, but I'm not complaining. Take us out of here, Siesta. Ocho. We'll see you next time right here on City Biz. KRUU-FM. Michael Halley, James Moore. Be yourself.